Come with me." The wealthy cowboy arrived to collect her father's debt, but instead he took her hand. Dust Hollow, Arizona Territory, spring of 1817. The wind carried dry heat across the parched earth, rattling the cracked window panes of the shack that squatted on the edge of town. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, fractured shadows across the porch where broken tools lay forgotten. Inside, the combined scents of sweat, whiskey, and neglect lingered like a persistent ghost that no one dared to banish. Vincent Vaughn dismounted silently, dust puffing from his boots as he approached the shack. He wasn't wearing spurs today. He didn't need any audible warning. The man inside already knew why he had come. He knocked once. The door creaked open before he could knock again. "What the hell do you want?" James Hartley growled, his shoulders hunched beneath a torn flannel shirt. His face was deeply etched by time, too much drinking, and a fury that never completely faded away. Vincent spoke without raising his voice. "It's been 6 months. I've come for what you owe me." Hartley scoffed and spat on the floor near Vincent's boots. "I don't have it. That's not my concern." "I said, I don't have it," Hartley snapped, swaying slightly. "What do you want me to do? Bleed silver? The mines are dried up. The fields are dead. You knew that when you loaned me the money." Vincent's jaw tightened. He remained silent. Hartley's eyes narrowed, then darted over his shoulder. A nasty grin curled on his lips. "Wait here. Wait here." He staggered back inside. A moment passed, then another. Vincent stood motionless, the oppressive heat pressing into his spine, the silence of the shack even louder than the fiercest of storms. The door opened again, this time wider. Hartley shoved a girl out into the sunlight by her shoulder. She stumbled, but caught herself before she fell. She was no longer a child, barefoot, with tangled dark hair and a faded green dress that was worn far too thin. Yet she stood tall as any woman could after being dragged out like a lamb being led to slaughter. "This one," Hartley said, gesturing toward her with a dismissive thumb. "Useless as a wife, useless as a daughter. Maybe she can be useful to you." Vincent's eyes didn't flinch, but they turned sharply toward the girl. "She's 18, Hartley went on, grinning now. "You've got land, money, a little girl that needs raising, and no woman to warm your bed. Take her. Call it even." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. She looked at her father as if she were seeing a stranger. "You can't be serious," she whispered. Hartley's grin vanished. "I fed you. I raised you. And for what? You can't even scrub a floor without whining. Do something for once in your miserable life." "No," Melissa said, her voice firmer. "I am not for sale." She turned away, but she was too slow. The sound of the slap cracked through the dry air, as loud as a thunderclap. She fell to the porch floor, her cheek blooming red, her hair falling over her eyes. "You ungrateful brat!" Hartley spat. "You're nothing but dead weight." Silence followed. Vincent didn't speak. He stepped forward. Hartley turned, perhaps to throw another insult, but he froze when he saw the look in Vincent's eyes, like frost meeting fire. Vincent walked past the old man, bent down, and offered Melissa his hand. She looked up, dazed, but not crying. Her lips trembled, but her pride held firm. Vincent's voice was low, but clear. "Come with me." Not an offer, not a question, a decision. Melissa stared at his hand, then at his face. For the first time in years, someone hadn't turned away from her. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The first time Melissa saw Maddox's ranch, it felt more like a small town than a home. Rows of barns and bunkhouses stretched across acres of dry earth and wild grass. Horses stamped in dusty corrals, and men moved like clockwork, shouting orders and sharpening tools beneath the broad sweep of the sky. Vincent said little as he helped her down from the wagon. His hand brushed hers only briefly, steady, firm, then gone. He pointed to a narrow structure tucked beside the stables. "That's your room." She nodded, clutching her bundle of belongings and stepping inside. The space smelled faintly of hay and damp wood. A narrow cot, a rusted wash basin, and a single cracked window. The blanket was thin. The floor was dirt. There was no warmth, no welcome. Just enough space to breathe, and nothing more. It was clear. This wasn't kindness. It was toleration. As she unpacked, she caught sight of a little girl peeking around the stable door. Pale curls, big, solemn eyes. Ella, Vincent's daughter. She watched Melissa silently, her arms tucked behind her back like a little ghost, unsure if she was allowed to speak. Melissa offered a small wave. Ella vanished without a word. By the second day, the whispers began. Melissa passed the bunkhouse carrying a basket of linens when she heard the first voice. Low, cutting. "Dead girl's got some hips on her, huh?" Then another. "Wonder what she's paying him with." Laughter followed. Boyd, thick-necked and always smelling of cheap whiskey, leaned against a post with two other men beside him. He tilted his head toward Melissa and smirked. "Reckon the boss got tired of sleeping alone." Melissa didn't flinch. She kept walking. She scrubbed floors, hauled buckets, washed Ella's sheets, and cleaned the main house in silence. She cooked when asked, waited when not, and when Ella dropped her cup or spilled her milk, Melissa only smiled and wiped it away without a word. Ella at first watched her with suspicion, then curiosity, then sometimes admiration, but the others they only pressed harder. By the end of the week, the teasing turned to touch. It was midday, the sun harsh overhead. Melissa made her way to the well with an empty pail, her apron dusted with flour. As she reached for the rope, Boyd stepped into her path. "Well now," he said, his eyes raking over her. "You sure know how to carry a bucket?" Melissa said nothing. She tried to step around him. He blocked her way. "You don't talk much, do you?" His breath reeked. Makes a man wonder what else you're quiet about. He reached out, his fingers brushing the inside of her wrist. She pulled back quickly, too quickly. The bucket slipped and clanged against the stones. She bent to pick it up, her heart hammering in her chest. Boyd stepped forward and planted his boot on the edge of her skirt. "Oops," he muttered. She tried to rise. He gave her a nudge with his foot. Not enough to hurt, but enough to humiliate. She fell to her knees in the dirt. "Get your boot off her skirt now!" The voice cut like a blade through the silence. Boyd froze. Melissa, still on her knees, looked up to see Vincent standing just a few feet away, one arm around Ella, his jaw set in stone. No one had heard him arrive. No one had noticed him watching. Vincent set his daughter down slowly. He walked to Boyd without a word, drew back, and punched him square in the face. The man collapsed, groaning in the dust. Vincent looked around at the others. "Anyone else want to test where I draw the line? Silence!" He turned to Melissa. She hadn't moved, her eyes wide, unsure if what she saw was real. Vincent offered his hand. She took it. As he pulled her to her feet, his voice dropped to something only she could hear. "If anyone makes you feel unsafe, including me, you tell me. This is your home now." Melissa blinked rapidly, the weight of those words pressing against something fragile inside her. Behind them, Ella stepped forward. Her small fingers slipped into Melissa's. "Papa," she whispered, "is she staying with us?" Vincent looked at Melissa, long and full, like a question and an answer at once. He nodded. From that day on, no one touched her, no one whispered. Melissa worked as before, but now there was a softness in her step, a smile that appeared when Ella trailed flowers across the kitchen floor, a quiet laugh when the dog stole bread from the table, and every night from the window of the main house, Vincent watched through the glass. The woman once offered like a mere coin had become the only thing keeping the home from falling silent. Rain had fallen hard the night before, unexpected and bitterly cold. The kind of storm that soaked through every layer of clothing and left the ground muddy and the air heavy with the scent of pine and wet dust. Melissa had stayed out longer than she should have, hauling firewood from the eastern fence line after the delivery boy failed to show up. By the time she returned, her dress clung to her skin and her lips had turned pale. She said nothing to anyone, just changed her clothes, quietly made dinner, and went to bed. By morning, she could barely sit up. Her forehead burned with fever, her breath shallow and uneven. The room spun when she opened her eyes. She curled up under the thin blanket, trying to will the fever away. Outside, the ranch stirred to life. But not far from the kitchen, a small figure tiptoed across the hall. Ella clutched a metal cup of water in both hands, careful not to spill a drop. Her little feet were bare against the wooden floor. She paused at the threshold of Melissa's room, hesitated, then stepped inside. "Miss Melissa," she whispered. No answer. Melissa stirred slightly, her brow furrowed, her lashes damp. Ella walked to the side of the bed and set the water down on the floor. She reached for the edge of the blanket and pulled it up higher over Melissa's shoulder. Then, with the gentlest motion a 4-year-old could manage, she climbed into the narrow cot beside her. Melissa blinked once, slowly. "Ella," her voice was barely audible. "You're sick," the girl said simply. Melissa smiled faintly, barely able to lift her hand. Ella took it. "I will keep you warm," she said. Outside, the wind rattled a loose shutter. Inside, warmth bloomed in silence. Minutes later, the door creaked open. Vincent stepped in, a leather pouch of medicine in one hand, a folded cloth in the other. He paused at the doorway. His breath caught halfway in his chest. There, in the dim morning light, lay his daughter, curled up beside the woman he had brought here, like a transaction, not for love, not for companionship, just to settle a debt. But now, Ella's small hand rested on Melissa's wrist, her head on Melissa's shoulder. The fevered woman held her gently, protectively, even in sleep. Vincent said nothing. He walked over and placed the pouch on the table, careful not to disturb them. He stood for a long while, his eyes tracing the soft lines of Melissa's face, the curve of her fingers as they rested near Ella's back. He hadn't seen his daughter sleep like that since her mother died, and the woman who brought that peace, she had no reason to, no obligation, just a quiet, persistent tenderness that asked for nothing in return. He swallowed the lump in his throat. As he turned to leave, Ella stirred, blinking up at him, "Papa," she whispered. Vincent knelt beside the bed. "Yes, sweetheart. She's staying, right?" He reached out and brushed a damp curl from her cheek. "She's staying," he whispered. "No matter what." The late afternoon sun cast long amber shadows through the kitchen windows. Melissa sat on the floor near the hearth, a pile of peeled apples in her lap, her movements slow but steady. Ella sat cross-legged beside her, fiddling with a piece of yarn, her tiny fingers tangling it into a loose braid. They had grown close in unspoken ways through shared glances, silent comforts, and soft laughter over spilled milk or crooked stitches. This afternoon felt no different until Melissa, without thinking, broke the silence with a voice too low for storytelling, too heavy for childhood. "My mama used to braid my hair like that." Ella looked up. "Where is she now?" Melissa hesitated. Her hands paused. The knife hovered above the last apple. "She's gone, like my mama." Ella nodded. "But mine didn't get sick. She was taken." Ella's eyes, too wise for her years, stayed fixed on Melissa's face. "My father hit her," Melissa said. Her voice was barely a breath. "She stepped between him and me once. He was angry, drunk and angry. Said I spoke out of turn." She swallowed hard. She never stood again after that night. Ella reached out and gently placed her hand over Melissa's. The knife was still now, resting quietly on the wooden board. "I'm sorry," the little girl whispered. Melissa smiled, but it broke unevenly. "I learned that pain yells loud, but silence can kill." Neither of them noticed the shadow standing just outside the door. Vincent leaned against the frame, his arms folded, his jaw clenched. He had come to ask about supper. Instead, he had heard something that would not leave him. Later that evening, thunder rumbled in the distance, dry and far off. The sky held the promise of a storm, but it wasn't the weather that shifted the air inside the house. A knock came at the main door. Vincent opened it to find James Hartley standing on the porch. His clothes were still stained with last week's dust. A toothpick was clenched between his lips, and there was something smug in his eyes. "You have something of mine," he said. Vincent didn't blink. "You lost your debt." Hartley chuckled. "I ain't talking about money. I'm talking about my girl." Vincent's fingers tightened on the doorframe. "There's a man in Dry Creek," Hartley went on. "Owns a feed store. No teeth, but plenty of money. Said he'll marry her. Wants someone quiet, simple, pretty enough. Melissa is not for trade." "Oh, come on. You had your time to play house with her. Now let her do something useful." A sharp intake of breath came from behind Vincent. Melissa stood in the hallway, barefoot, her hands trembling. She looked at her father, not with fear this time, but with something heavier, disgust, resolve. "I will not go," she said. Hartley scoffed. "Girl, you do what I say. Always have." "No," she whispered. And then she dropped to her knees beside Vincent, her eyes burning with desperation. "Please," she said, "do not let him take me. I would rather die here on this land, in this house, than be sold again." Hartley laughed. "Look at that. Still dramatic as ever." But Vincent no longer looked at him. He looked down at Melissa, then gently helped her to her feet. He turned to face Hartley. "She belongs here now," Vincent said, his voice like cold iron. "Not to you, not to anyone else." For the first time, Hartley looked uncertain. Vincent stepped forward, forcing the older man back onto the porch. "You come again," Vincent warned, "and I won't be civil." He shut the door. Behind him, Melissa stood silent, her hands clenched at her sides. Vincent met her gaze, then nodded once. "You're safe," he said. And for the first time, she believed it. The wind howled that night like a wounded animal, carrying with it the dry scent of cedar and something acrid. Smoke. It started just after midnight. A spark, maybe from an untended lantern, or a careless ember drifting from the blacksmith's forge. No one knew for sure. But by the time the flames began licking at the walls of the old supply barn, most of the ranch was still fast asleep. Melissa wasn't. She had risen early to fetch extra blankets, something in the wind pulling at her nerves. That was when she saw it. An orange flicker curling up the edge of the barn roof, small but growing fast. And inside she knew that Ella sometimes crept there, curling up in the hayloft with a book, or just to escape. Melissa didn't think. She ran. The doors were warm to the touch, creaking as she forced them open. The smoke curled into her throat, sharp and bitter, but she saw the tiny shape in the hay just as a beam cracked above. "Ella!" she shouted, coughing hard. The child stirred, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Melissa fought through the smoke, scooping the girl into her arms and bolting back through the haze as the fire roared behind them. The hem of her dress caught briefly, flames searing up her side before she rolled onto the dirt outside, shielding Ella beneath her. They lay there gasping for air, Melissa's skin blistering, Ella clinging to her like roots to soil. By the time the alarm was raised, the barn was lost. Flames ate through wood and rope, casting eerie shadows across the ranch. Vincent was out riding fence miles away when he saw the glow on the horizon. He spurred his horse hard, his heart in his throat. He had seen fire before, but never from his own land, never near his child. He reached the ranch, wild-eyed, his breath ragged. The barn was smouldering, the crew dousing the last flames. He leaped from the saddle, shouting, "Ella! She's safe!" One of the hands called. Melissa pulled her out. He turned toward the house. Inside, Ella sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her thumb in her mouth. Vincent fell to his knees in front of her and pulled her close, his eyes squeezed shut. Then he saw the burns, not on Ella, on Melissa. Her forearm was wrapped in a damp cloth, the sleeve torn, raw skin underneath glowing angry red. "You're hurt," he said, his voice too soft to be his. "It is nothing," she whispered. "She is safe." He said nothing more, only took her hand and led her gently to the kitchen. He washed her burn with cool water, the silence between them heavier than pain. His hands were steady at first, until she winced. Then they trembled. She noticed. "You don't have to." "I do," he said simply. He wrapped the clean cloth around her arm, his fingers brushing the tender skin beneath. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. They sat there afterward, both exhausted, facing the flames that now burned safely behind brick. Melissa glanced at him, her voice barely a breath. "Why do you not touch me?" Vincent looked over, startled. "You could have," she said. "That first night, or the next. You could have, but you didn't." He met her gaze fully now, for the first time. No hesitation, no shield. "Because," he said, "if I touch you, I won't be able to stop." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, and in her eyes was something unspoken, something aching and old and familiar. Two souls who had wandered too long, who had stopped believing in warmth. But in that firelight, they saw it in each other. The morning was too quiet. Melissa felt it in her bones before she heard the knock. There was no clang of tools, no calls from the stable hands, not even the rustle of wind through the dry grass. Just stillness, unnatural, pressing, foreboding. Vincent opened the door to find two men standing outside, one short and stout, dressed in fine city clothes that looked out of place against the dust, and the other taller, older, with the bitter scowl she had grown up fearing.
"James Hartley brought someone to see the girl," Hartley announced, stepping past Vincent like he owned the very air between them. "This here's Mr. Bernard Whitlock, owns half the freight wagons running through Prescott." Whitlock tipped his hat politely, his eyes lingering too long on Melissa as she came to the doorway. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. His gaze wasn't cruel, but it was cold, measuring. "I heard you're looking for stability, miss," the man said. "Your father tells me you're of age, hard-working, quiet. I run a clean house. You'd have servants, a new dress every week. I'd take care of the debt, no questions asked." Melissa didn't move. Vincent's jaw tensed. He said nothing. He stood beside her, unmoving, unreadable, but his stillness was thunderous. Hartley stepped forward, his voice oily. "Girl, this is a blessing. A man like him doesn't come knocking for just anyone. You think this offer is going to come again?" Melissa looked at her father, his face full of expectation, but none of love. Then at Whitlock, whose smile never reached his eyes. Finally she turned to Vincent, but he didn't speak. His arms were crossed, his stare fixed on the floor, as if surrendering the choice to her, but not without pain. She saw it. Melissa stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but each word struck with the weight of truth. "I don't want a new dress," she said. "I don't want servants or promises or debts paid by someone who doesn't know me." Whitlock's brows rose. "You'd rather scrub floors and feed pigs. I would rather feel seen." She turned to Hartley, then back to Vincent. "I have known what it means to be unwanted, to be used, to be spoken for, but never heard." But here her voice broke, then steadied. "I have been looked at not as a burden or as a bargain, but with kindness, with eyes that did not pity me." She stepped back inside and gently closed the door. Partly cursed on the porch, Whitlock left without a word. Vincent remained silent. He looked at Melissa only once, then walked out the back door. The sky was turning copper over the hills. Melissa stood frozen for a moment before panic took her limbs. She ran across the yard, past the garden, to the stables where she found him tightening the saddle straps on his horse, his back to her, his breath heavy. "Vincent!" she called. He didn't turn. She rushed forward and threw her arms around him, pressing her cheek to his back. "Don't go," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, if you walk away now, I won't have any home left." He turned slowly, his hands resting at her waist. Their eyes met, tired, raw, but full. "I didn't know if you would choose me," he whispered. "I just did." The weekly market in Dust Hollow had never seen a crowd this thick. Sunlight danced off tin signs, and horses snorted at their reins. Men leaned against posts chewing tobacco, women bartered over fabric, and children chased chickens through the dust.
But when Vincent Vaughan stepped onto the porch of the old town hall, all movement seemed to hush. He stood tall, a man rarely seen in town unless it was for supplies or business. Today, though, there was something different in his posture, a finality, a quiet thunder. Melissa stood nearby, uncertain, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. Ella clung to her side, staring up with wide eyes. Vincent cleared his throat, his voice firm but calm. "I want to speak to everyone here," he began, "not just as a landowner, but as a man who's watched enough silence do damage." People turned, heads tilted, whispers passed through the crowd. Vincent took a slow breath. "Months ago, James Hartley came to me with a debt he could not repay. What he offered in return was not land nor cattle, but his daughter." A low murmur swept through the crowd. Shock, judgment, curiosity. "She came to my home not as a guest," he continued, "but as property, handed over like coin. I took her in because I could. He couldn't stomach what had been done to her. I gave her a place to sleep, work to do, but she gave back more than I ever asked." His eyes met Melissa's. "She gave my daughter back her laughter. She gave the house a soul again." He turned to the crowd, his voice sharpening with each word. "Let it be known here now. James Hartley's debt is erased. The land he borrowed against will not be claimed. I want nothing from that man." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "But more importantly," he said, his voice rising with intensity, "Melissa Hartley owes me nothing. She is not a servant, not a kept woman, not a bargaining chip. She is not mine to own, but she is, if she chooses, part of my family." Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by a low murmur that began to swell, opinions rising like a wildfire whipped up by the wind. But before the voices could truly take over, a small, clear voice cut through the noise. "Please stay with us," Ella pleaded. She had stepped forward, clutching Melissa's hand in both of her own small ones, her face turned up, her eyes shining with earnest hope. Melissa stared at her, at this tiny girl who had once refused to speak, who had buried her joy so deep inside herself. And now she was offering Melissa her heart, pure and untarnished. Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes, blurring her vision. Then, without anyone asking her to, she stepped forward to face the town, the very people who had once whispered behind their hands, judging her silence, her past, her presence in the home of a wealthy widower. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied it with each word, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside. "All my life," she began, her voice ringing with newfound determination, "I have been spoken for, passed around like a thing to be used or dismissed. I have been the shame of my father, the talk of your porches, the girl no one wanted." She paused, letting her words sink in. Some in the crowd looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Others met her eyes, a flicker of guilt dancing behind their curiosity. "But not here," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Not with him. Not with this little girl." Her hand tightened gently around Ella's. "I was not chosen before, but today I choose." She turned to Vincent, her gaze locking with his, and declared, "I choose to stay." The wind carried her words like an oath, soft, yet undeniable, echoing through the hushed air. Vincent's eyes burned with emotion, not with pride or triumph, but with the weight of everything that had remained unsaid between them.
The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. A profound sense of respect hung in the air, thicker than any noise could ever be. For the first time, Melissa Hartley was not someone's burden, nor someone's bargain. She was her own woman, and she had chosen where she belonged. The evening air was heavy with silence, the kind that precedes important decisions or heartfelt goodbyes. The sun dipped low behind the hills, bathing the ranch in a warm, golden light, its edges painted in shades of orange and rust. A gentle breeze swept across the porch, rustling the edge of a worn blanket draped over a chair, carrying with it the faint, comforting scent of cedarwood and home. Melissa stood by the wagon, her hands carefully folding the last of her clothes into a simple burlap bag. Her fingers paused on a ribbon, one of Ella's, forgotten in the laundry. She held it for a moment longer than she intended to, the soft fabric a poignant reminder of what she was leaving behind. She hadn't said goodbye yet, not officially. But the quiet stillness surrounding the house told her that Vincent already knew her intentions. Inside, Ella sat on the floor with her favorite stuffed horse, unusually quiet and still. Just beyond the porch steps stood Vincent, one hand resting gently on the head of their old cattle dog, the other hanging loosely at his side. He watched her. He watched the subtle curve of her back when she hesitated, betraying her inner turmoil. He watched the slight tremor in her hands as she folded the items that held memories. He watched everything, absorbing every detail, and said nothing, until he did. "Come with me," he finally said, his voice low and steady. Melissa froze, her back still turned towards him. The words were not loud, not desperate, but carried an irresistible weight, like a river slowly but surely carving its way through stone. She turned slowly to face him. He was closer now, just a few paces away, the last rays of sunlight catching the sharp angle of his jaw, illuminating the fine lines near his eyes. She searched his face, seeking answers or permission, or perhaps just some glimmer of understanding that she could put a name to. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Not to pay a debt," he began. "Not because I need a mother for my daughter. Not because the town's talking." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "But because you fit here. Because when you laugh, the house breathes easier. Because when you touch her hair, she sleeps through the night. And because when you are near me, I feel like something I lost a long time ago has finally found its way back." Melissa's eyes blurred with tears, her heart swelling with emotion. She pressed a hand to her chest. "I don't have anything," she whispered, her voice trembling with vulnerability. Vincent stepped forward, shaking his head slowly. "You have everything," he countered, his eyes locked on hers. Silence descended once more, heavy and expectant. And then a shift, a breaking of the tension. She dropped the ribbon back into the bag and let the rest of her belongings fall to the ground, forgotten. The wind caught the hem of her skirt as she walked toward him, slow but steady, as if crossing a bridge made of something invisible yet unbreakable. She stopped just inches from him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Say it again," she whispered, needing to hear the words one more time to solidify the reality of this moment. He smiled, a hint of sadness still lingering in his eyes. "Come with me," he repeated, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was waiting," she confessed, her voice barely audible. Vincent reached for her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, a silent promise of connection and belonging. From the doorway, Ella peeked out, her small face alight with something more profound than simple hope. "Are we going now?" she asked, already stepping barefoot onto the grass, eager to begin their new life. Melissa laughed softly, tears streaming down her cheeks like morning dew. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "We are." They walked together, man, woman, child, and dog, across the field that was bathed in the last golden light of the day. Vincent's hand never left hers, his touch a constant reassurance. As they crested the rise where the sky met the earth, Ella turned back, beaming with happiness. "Mama!" she shouted, her voice filled with pure delight. "Come on!" Melissa's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Vincent, who gave her a small, knowing nod, a silent encouragement to embrace the future that awaited them. She squeezed his hand firmly, and then they continued walking together toward a life not owed, not borrowed, but freely chosen. Thank you for riding with us through this heartfelt journey of love, redemption, and quiet courage on the untamed frontier. If Melissa and Vincent's story moved you, if Ella's small voice tugged at your heartstrings, and if you believe that love can rise even from ash and debt, then don't forget to hit that like button, smash the subscribe, and join us here at Wild West Love Stories. We bring you legendary tales of forbidden romance, fierce devotion, and timeless connection from the dusty trails of the American West, where bullets missed but hearts didn't. Until the next story, partner, ride true.